Hi, and welcome back to the Flying Goat Farm podcast with me, Lisa Check. Today, we're going to be talking all about natural dyeing. But first, here's what's happening on the farm. I'm recording this the week of Thanksgiving, and it has suddenly turned extremely cold. Yesterday, it didn't get over 36. It's like kind of like what you would expect in January or February around here, not November. Um, so the chickens are staying warm because they are in their nice greenhouse that kind of funnels the sun's heat. Um, Lucas is out in the orchard because he just loves being out there and he's been running back and forth. So I think he's keeping himself pretty warm too. Pancha is now living in the house because he's getting a little bit older. And of course, the sheep are full of fleece, so they are doing fine. Everybody's handling the cold weather. It's just now part of falling into winter around here. So, before in this series has been on Fibershed, and so I've done several kind of informational podcasts for you, and then just the past three episodes have been conversations with people that I know through the Chesapeake Fibershed, and talking about our creative journeys and what got us interested in the Fibershed, and about what our kind of our creative intent is with being on this doing sustainable cloth challenge and other um, projects around our area that works towards regenerative agriculture and local dyes, local fiber, local labor. And so today is an extension of that. Let's talk about natural dyes. So there's commercially dyed yarn and fabric, there's low impact dyeing, and there's naturally dyed. So what's the difference? So commercially dyed yarn is what I've been talking about with fast fashion. It's mostly done with toxic dyes in a way that's environmentally harmful. And this is because the plastic fibers that are being used in fast fashion, the polyester, etc., does not take any fiber reactive kind of dyes. So it needs petroleum based dyes to get the brilliant colors that most people are yearning for. Um, I, I also did a podcast earlier about going to some of the mills in South Carolina, and you could just tell that they were using these commercial dyes because the whole um, the air just permeated with the smell, very, very chemical smell, and the colors were very bright and vibrant, and they were dyeing polyester and wool, but on two different lines because the wool dyes would be different than what they would need for the polyester. Eventually, they all come together to make a polyester wool blend yarn, but coming into it, they're on two different things. So that's the commercially dyed pieces. Is um, Those are the ones that we want to avoid. Um, they are toxic dyes when they are wet, but they also can permeate in our skin. Our skin being our biggest organ. More information on that is in the Fibershed book by Rebecca Burgess. So low impact dyeing is using dyes that are specifically made for natural fibers. For instance, for any kind of protein fiber, wool, alpaca, anything made with an animal, silk, that kind of thing, you're going to be using an acid dye. It's low impact. If you are doing some kind of a plant-based fiber, you are going to be using what they call them fiber reactive dyes, something like an MX kind of system. The end product that you are throwing away down your drain is either slightly acidic water or slightly alkaline water. The point is the math that you do is so that all of the dye ends up into the yarn or cloth, and you aren't throwing those also petroleum made products um, into the water stream. And of course, natural dyeing is using plants and some bugs. So, more specifically, what is natural dyeing? So, it goes back into antiquity. Commercial dyes were developed after the discovery of petroleum products. So, there's been, you know, eons and eons of time where we were dyeing, humans, we were dyeing our clothes, and we were dyeing them with things that we foraged out in the countryside that we were around. And there's many traditions that have been handed down in various countries and in families that have passed down recipes for many, many colors that come from the plants that are grown in their immediate vicinity. A great book for that is True Colors. Um, and you can see some of the stories of these families that are passing down this knowledge and keeping the plant knowledge and dye knowledge alive. So in order for these dyes that are in wood, they're in flowers, they're in leaves, they're in mushrooms, they're in lichen. There, I mentioned the bugs, cochineal and lac are two bugs. There's even some mollusks that you can read about. The murex was decimated by the Romans, but there's another kind of um, shellfish, a different species of murex that is being sustainably used in Mexico. So, in order for these dyes to bond to the fiber, whether that's wool or cotton or silk or linen, the fiber needs to be first washed very well. The term for that is called scouring, um, and that's to take out any kind of oils or dirt that might be on the outside of the fiber. Then it needs to be treated with a substance that we call a mordant that bonds to the fiber and will eventually bind or bond to the dye. It's kind of like this. It's a mineral salt, usually made with aluminum, and there are a couple of natural sources of plants that accumulate alum in their leaves and things like that. But it's kind of like they're holding hands. You need this intermediary that's holding on to your fiber, and then eventually when it hits the dye stuff, then the other hand of that will bind to the dye stuff, kind of like holding hands. And so after the fiber, the yarn, the fabric is scoured, and then it is mordanted. After that, then the fiber can or fabric can be painted. It can be immersed in dyes. It can be stamped with a dye, and those dyes will hold on to the fiber. There's a couple of well, not a couple. There's several dye stuffs, natural dye stuffs that don't need to have that mordant step, and those are ones that are high in tannin. For instance, in our area, black walnuts dye very well, and you don't need to have that mordant intermediary with it. So where do the dyes come from? So they're either fair trade, they're foraged, or they're grown. So fair traded dyes, they're grown and foraged mostly in tropical countries. But so many of us don't live in tropical countries. So they are foraged or grown. Like I said, they're ground. Sometimes they are extracted with water and then dried, so you just have the dye stuff and um, not the plant part of the dye. Um, and then they are sold to ethical companies for our use that sell them to us as fair trade. Some examples of those would be cochineal, kutch, logwood, Brazil wood, sapin wood, a lot of the wood dyes. Lac would also be that, and the insect dyes are going to be fair traded in the United States. Um, you can, I guess, in the Southwest, you would be able to find cochineal. You would be able to forage that. Um, Again, you would need to do that pretty ethically and not taking all the bugs because they need to procreate so that they continue to provide stuffs for us. Then you have forage dyes. So those are the ones you find in your yard or your neighborhood or the roadside too. And those examples, just like I just mentioned, the black walnut. Here we also have persimmons, and green persimmons make a dye. The goldenrod, um, madder to a certain extent. You can forage or you can grow it. And lots of plant leaves, oak leaves, plum leaves, acorns, um, blackberry leaves, pokeweed, so many things that are considered weeds or kind of noxious plants. To some people, they make beautiful color. And then, of course, there's ones that you can grow yourself that you can cultivate in your own garden and use in dyeing. And so, examples of that are marigolds, hollyhocks, Hopi sunflowers, indigo, and like I said before, the madder. I have grown madder here on my property. If you consider, madder is a beautiful orange color. If you ever consider um, growing it, just know that it's pretty invasive and it's really hard to get rid of. Um, it's a very strong plant, which is good because it does make a beautiful color, but plant it somewhere where you can try to keep it under some kind of control. So, what's the benefit of dyeing naturally? Well, it's better for the environment, first and foremost. It uses mostly non toxic materials. Some mordants and afterbaths can be toxic, and it's up to the dyer which of these they feel comfortable using. For instance, you can use chrome, you can use tin. I don't personally use those things because they are toxic. It would be something to ask if you're going to buy naturally dyed yarn or fabric. It's definitely good to ask, what are you using and is it toxic? Also, with natural dyeing, it can be done with low water techniques, which is really especially important in our drought-ridden times and in various parts of the world and our country. You can find and or grow the materials locally. So you're again having a low carbon footprint because you're not having it sent to you by FedEx or UPS, and also the dye stuff itself has not come over from India um, or Guatemala or any of those places. So if you can find and grow the materials, it's a lower carbon footprint. And the few of those things that can't be foraged or grown, you can purchase them through fair trade. And again, um, part of the fair trade agreement is that they're using environmentally friendly techniques. So there are some pitfalls to natural dyes. So let's talk about those. Um, some of the most prized colors come from materials that may be very rare, and that's why it's important to work with ethical companies. For instance, many of the woods that are used, like logwood and Brazil wood, some of those are kind of endangered. So you need to make sure that I need to make sure as a dyer that what I'm buying is being ethically harvested and sustainably produced. Um, and all of these dyes are really, really beautiful, but they aren't the bright fashion colors that are popular in fast fashion. So it's uh, very hard to get any, bright neon kind of colors. And one of the biggest drawbacks of natural dyes is that many of them are what we call fugitive. That means that they don't stay on the garment forever, or they can change over time. They could maybe change from a purple to more of a brown color over time. Again, that's something that you can ask the dyer if you once you are, making your purchase, is this a fugitive dye? Um, or is it going to stay pretty close to this color through its lifetime? So let's talk about light fastness because again, these if you're keeping your clothing for a long period of time, and we hope that you do because that's the whole point of slow fashion, you are going to have some fading over time. Light fastness is the measure of how a fabric or yarn um, and its color and the colorants that are in there, the dyes that are in there, how they are affected by UV rays of the sun. Some dyes, like the persimmons that I was noting, actually get darker when they're exposed to the light, but most of them do not. So you need to be sure to store your naturally dyed fabrics or yarns away from windows where they might fade in the light. And then there's color fastness. So that's a measure of how tightly the color bonds to the fiber. So some dyes just may not have a strong bond, and so they fade over time and with use. And this is especially true of dyes that are made from food products. A lot of people start their natural dye journey by looking at dyeing with black beans or dyeing with red cabbage or something like that. And those typically are ones that would be more fugitive. They're not going to be bound as tightly as other dyes, and so they are going to fade more quickly than others. Logwood also is notorious for changing through the years. Again, um, being sure that you're caring for your clothing that's naturally dyed in a good way, keeping it away from sunlight when it's not in use, is a good habit to get into. Finally, there is a word, something that happens. It's called crocking. And crocking is what happens when a dye is rubbed off through use. And you think about your blue jeans. So over time, the area of the knees or the thighs and your backside, they fade faster than, say, um, the the blue that is closer to your ankles or something like that. And that's because they're being rubbed there, and that's called crocking. When you are knitting, sometimes the friction of your hands and needles will also cause any unbonded dye to come off. It's very easy to, you just wash it off your hands, wash it off your needles. It should not stay, it should not bond, but it can be kind of alarming to people. Indigo specifically is one that has more problems with crocking than other dyes, but I have seen it in various various dyes. And just know that the dye that is coming off has not been bonded to the fabric or the fiber, so that's why it's coming off easily. And in my practice, while every step is taken to rinse the excess dye out, sometimes there's still some unattached dye left in the yarn. And so when you are um, you're blocking your sweater or whatever, you may have some little dye runoff. It may happen. And so it's always a good idea when you are doing your blocking to do it with cool water, not hot water. So, what should I look for, and why should I look for naturally dyed stuff, and why should I buy it? And Again, it's as we work towards fixing the environmental crisis that faces us, we need to be trying to purchase all natural fiber. And if that fiber is local, that's even better. And the trifecta is when the garment is made with that local natural fiber that has been dyed naturally. Yes, it is going to be more expensive, so buy wisely and buy investment pieces. And if you are able, you can make them yourself and cut down on part of that cost and definitely the petroleum or carbon footprint by making them yourself. One silver lining about naturally dyed fabrics and yarns is that they look great together. They mix and match really well, and they all have this kind of moodiness about them that makes them just go great together in some kind of a stripy hat or a stripy sweater or something along those lines where you can use many different hues and have them all really work so great together. So how should you care for your naturally dyed fabric? So some of this we've talked already about in this season and in this episode. So increase the number of wears that you have between washes. Um, you just don't need to wash everything every time you wear it. Use cold water to wash. And if this is something that is handmade, you're probably going to want to even, wash it by hand. That's up to you, or put it in the gentle cycle, something like that. Use a neutral pH soap so the colors don't change. Some of these colors are affected by how acid or alkaline, or acid or basic that the water is. And so look for a neutral pH soap and store them away from the windows and out of the sun. But probably most of all is just, I think our expectations need to change a little. Expect that these garments will change over time, that they will get lighter in color, but that's what is expected. And by caring for them properly, you can slow down the fade. So, what kind of project shows off naturally dyed yarns the best? And really, um, any project is great with naturally dyed yarn. And something like I was just saying that is many different colors that you can use gradient sets for, or something like that is going to be fantastic. The one caution that I would make sure that you know is that if you're using a known light and color fast or color, um, I should say that differently. If you're using a, a dye that you know is not color fast, is not as light fast as it should be, don't put it in color work because you spend so much time making, using the different colors for your stranded color work or Fair Isle, that it could be wasted if the dyes begin to fade or change over time. You may lose the contrast that makes color work so fantastic. So that would be my one caveat, is to think carefully and ask good questions of the dyer. If I want to do this color work, which of these dyes should I make or should I buy? So here's your call to action. Do you know any natural dyers in your area? More and more artisan dyers are starting to use natural materials. Now in our area, I know two who make and sell naturally dyed yarn. Of course, me, I do, and also Color Storms. So we are both in the Chesapeake Fibershed. And if you are not in my immediate locale, you can go to the fibershed.org website. You can go to the affiliate program, find the Fibershed affiliate that's in your area, and nearly all of the Fibershed affiliates have a map and have a list of resources, and you can start there. If you don't find any of those people, any dyers that use natural dyes on that website, on the affiliate website, call them and ask. That's what they are there for, is to, bring together producers and makers and to be able to have local fiber, local dye, and local labor to make our local wardrobes. So until next time, happy making.